Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I want to share with you an extraordinary tale of betrayal, calculation, and ultimate revenge. This isn't just any story. It's a raw account of how one man discovered his entire family had been manipulated against him, and the meticulous way he orchestrated his response. Join me as we step into the world of calculated revenge. Thaddeus Mercer adjusted his platinum cufflinks as he stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse. At 53, his salt-and-pepper hair framed a face marked by intelligence rather than conventional good looks, deep-set gray eyes that missed nothing, and lines etched by years of strategic decisions that had built Sentinel Data Securities into a billion-dollar cybersecurity empire. 30 floors below, New York City pulsed with pre-Christmas energy. Holiday lights transformed the December darkness into a glittering spectacle that usually brought Thaddeus a sense of satisfaction. This year, however, his mind was elsewhere. "Daddy, look what I made." 10-year-old Eliza burst into his study, brandishing a handmade Christmas ornament, a glittery pine cone with a bright red ribbon. Thaddeus turned, his expression softening as it always did for his daughter. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Where shall we hang it on the tree?" "Grandmother Octavia says we should put it on the back where guests won't see it," Eliza said matter-of-factly. "She says it doesn't match the crystal theme she planned." Thaddeus's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Is that so? Well, I think we'll place it front and center. After all, it's our family tree, not a museum exhibit." He knelt to Eliza's level, meeting her bright blue eyes, so like her mother's, yet untainted by calculation. "Never let anyone make you feel your creations aren't worthy of being seen, Eliza." As his daughter skipped away, Thaddeus returned to the window, his reflection now harder, colder. In the 17 years since he'd married Veronica Blackwood, daughter of shipping magnate Octavia Blackwood, he'd grown accustomed to his mother-in-law's thinly veiled contempt. Born to a working-class family in Pittsburgh, Thaddeus had clawed his way into Wharton and then built his company from nothing. Yet to Octavia, he remained perpetually unsuitable for her aristocratic daughter. What bothered him now, however, wasn't Octavia's predictable snobbery. It was the pattern he'd been observing for months. Veronica's increasingly frequent charity galas that left no digital footprint. 15-year-old Winston's sudden disdain for their weekend coding sessions. The mysterious calls his wife took in the garden, phone signal jammer activated. The unexplained transfers from their joint accounts to offshore holdings. Thaddeus hadn't built a cybersecurity empire by ignoring patterns. Someone was systematically turning his family against him, and he had strong suspicions about who was orchestrating it. The question was, why now after all these years? 5 years earlier, Thaddeus had noticed the first hairline fracture in his marriage. Nothing dramatic, just Veronica declining their traditional anniversary weekend in favor of a sudden art acquisition trip to Geneva. When she returned, there was a new coldness in her eyes that occasionally thawed but never fully disappeared. At first, Thaddeus had attributed the change to the natural evolution of a long marriage. He'd redoubled his efforts, surprise gifts, spontaneous getaways, more involvement with the children despite his punishing work schedule. For nearly a year, he'd tried to bridge whatever invisible gap had formed between them. Then came the Barsotti account. Dominic Barsotti, CEO of rival security firm Nexus Technologies, had been Thaddeus's primary competitor for decades. Their companies regularly faced off for the same high-profile contracts, and there was no love lost between them. When Sentinel won the Pentagon's cybersecurity overhaul contract over Nexus, industry insiders had expected Barsotti to launch a counteroffensive. What Thaddeus hadn't expected was finding Veronica and Barsotti in deep conversation at the Metropolitan Opera Gala, their heads inclined toward each other in unmistakable intimacy. When confronted later that night, Veronica had laughed it off. "Really, Thaddeus? Dominic was simply telling me about their new education initiative. Some of us care about more than corporate warfare." Her dismissive tone had effectively ended the conversation, but not Thaddeus's suspicions. 2 weeks later, a junior analyst at Sentinel flagged unusual activity in their secure development server. Someone had accessed proprietary encryption algorithms, the very technology that had secured the Pentagon contract. The access had come from Thaddeus's own home network at 2:17 a.m., using his private credentials. The breach was contained before any data was extracted, but the implications were clear. Either Thaddeus had sleepwalked through an attempted corporate espionage, or someone in his house had used his credentials while he slept. That night, instead of confronting Veronica, Thaddeus made a decision that would alter the course of their lives. He would observe, gather data, analyze patterns, and plan his response with the same meticulous attention to detail that had built his empire. "You need to consider the possibility that you're becoming paranoid," suggested Lysander Wells, Sentinel's chief security officer and Thaddeus's oldest friend since their scholarship days at Wharton. They were sharing late-night whiskeys in Thaddeus's secure office, surrounded by quantum encryption technology that made digital eavesdropping impossible. "Perhaps," Thaddeus conceded, swirling amber liquid in a crystal tumbler. "But paranoia and pattern recognition share remarkably similar neural pathways. The difference lies in whether the patterns actually exist." Lysander leaned forward, his dark eyes serious beneath steel-gray hair. "And if they do exist? What then, Thad?" "Then I'll need your help," Thaddeus replied simply. "What I'm about to propose exists in a moral gray area, my friend. When has that ever stopped us?" Lysander smiled grimly, raising his glass. "To ethical flexibility in service of justice." Over the next 3 years, Thaddeus lived a carefully compartmentalized life. To his family, he was increasingly distant, consumed by Sentinel's global expansion. The perfect cover for a man being systematically excluded from his own family's emotional life. Behind this facade, Thaddeus worked with a small circle of trusted allies. Lysander handled technical surveillance, establishing a parallel security system that monitored all communications in and out of Thaddeus's residences without triggering alerts on the primary system Veronica believed was solely in operation. Irene Zhao, Sentinel's brilliant young CFO, created a financial honeypot, accounts designed to appear vulnerable while actually tracking every transaction attempt. When Veronica began siphoning funds, each transfer was meticulously documented while appearing successful. Meanwhile, international security specialist Kamal Raza coordinated physical surveillance on Barsati, gathering evidence of meetings not just with Veronica, but with Octavia Blackwood and senior executives at Nexus Technologies. The pattern that emerged was both elegant and devastating. Barsati wasn't just having an affair with Veronica. He was orchestrating a multi-pronged attack on Thaddeus's life. Financial drainage through sophisticated transfers that would eventually be untraceable. Corporate espionage targeting Sentinel's core technologies. And most painfully, the systematic alienation of Thaddeus from his children. Winston, once his father's shadow, now barely acknowledged him at dinner. The boy's tutor, recommended by Octavia and thoroughly vetted by Veronica, had been identified as a former Nexus employee. Computer logs showed regular deletions of messages between Winston's devices and Thaddeus's, messages his son presumed his father was ignoring. Only Eliza remained untouched, too young to be effectively manipulated against her father. Thaddeus ensured this continued through secret chess lessons and bedtime stories scheduled when Veronica believed he was working late, building a fortress of affection that even Barsati's scheme couldn't penetrate. "They're planning to leave after Christmas," Lysander reported during one of their secure meetings in early December. "Tickets to Zurich, connecting to a private charter. Reservations at that chalet in Verbier that Barsati owns through 7 shell companies." Thaddeus nodded, unsurprised. "And the final transfer?" "Scheduled for December 23rd, Irene confirmed. "They're going for everything, Thad. Not just the honeypot accounts. They've prepared documentation for a hostile takeover of Sentinel itself. Veronica's signatures on board resolutions, backdated meeting minutes. They've created a paper trail suggesting you've been mentally unstable, making irrational decisions that necessitate emergency board action. Octavia's been quietly approaching your investors," Kamal added, positioning herself as the concerned mother-in-law, worried about your increasingly erratic behavior. The groundwork for the narrative is already laid. Thaddeus absorbed this information without visible reaction, though his fingers tightened slightly on his pen. "And Dominic? Where is he in all this?" "Patient zero," Lysander said grimly. "This isn't his first operation, Thad. We've identified 7 previous targets, all successful executives whose wives suddenly divorced them, taking the children and most of the assets. In each case, the ex-wives ended up in Europe briefly before being abandoned once the funds were secured. The children remained alienated from their fathers. And in 3 cases, Nexus Technologies acquired the executives' companies for pennies on the dollar during the ensuing financial chaos. Thaddeus nodded slowly. The perfect crime. The victims are too ashamed to admit how completely they were played, both emotionally and financially. Precisely, Kamal confirmed. No one has connected the dots because no one wants to admit there were dots to connect. Until now, Thaddeus said quietly. How much longer do we need? 2 more days, Irene replied. The international banking documentation will be complete by then. The corporate evidence is already solid. Perfect. Thaddeus leaned back in his chair. Then we proceed as discussed. Everything must be ready for the Christmas dinner. As his team departed, Thaddeus remained in his office, contemplating the chessboard on his desk. He moved a knight into position, then the queen, creating an inescapable trap for the Black King. Checkmate in 3 moves, he murmured to himself. Always think 3 moves ahead. The Mercer family's annual Christmas dinner had been a Manhattan social fixture for a decade. 60 guests filled their penthouse's grand dining room. Board members, business partners, family friends, and select society figures whose presence Octavia had insisted upon years ago and now served as unwitting witnesses to the evening Thaddeus had meticulously planned. The 20-foot noble fir sparkled with the crystal ornaments Octavia had selected, though Eliza's pinecone held pride of place at eye level, directly in the sight line of anyone entering the room. Thaddeus had placed it there himself as Octavia watched with thinly disguised irritation. Veronica was resplendent in crimson Valentino, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon that showcased the diamond earrings Thaddeus had given her for their 10th anniversary. She played the perfect hostess, though Thaddeus noted how she barely met his eyes and kept Winston close to her side throughout the evening. As the main course was cleared and before dessert was served, Veronica tapped her crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon. The melodious chimes silenced the animated conversations around the table. I'd like to make an announcement, she said, her voice carrying an undercurrent of triumph poorly disguised as solemnity. Her eyes flicked briefly to her mother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Thaddeus set down his water glass, expression neutral though his pulse quickened. She was deviating from the timeline. Interesting. As some of you may have noticed, things have been difficult at Sentinel recently, Veronica continued. After much reflection and consultation with the board, I've made the painful decision to take a more active role in the company's management. Murmurs rippled around the table. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly hearing this for the first time despite Veronica's implication of prior consultation. Furthermore, she continued, voice strengthening, Winston, Eliza, and I will be relocating to our European headquarters after the new year to oversee the transition. Thaddeus will be taking a much-needed sabbatical to address some personal challenges. The room fell silent. Winston stared at his plate, shoulders hunched. Eliza looked confused, her eyes darting between her parents. Octavia's lips curved into a satisfied smile. Thaddeus absorbed the announcement without flinching, noting the calculated public humiliation. A tactical error on Veronica's part, driven by overconfidence and the desire to see him squirm before his peers. He took a deliberate sip of water, set down his glass, and straightened his cuffs. I see, he said, voice perfectly modulated. And when was this decision finalized? The paperwork was completed yesterday, Veronica replied smoothly. The children's things are already packed. How efficient, Thaddeus remarked. Though I must say, your timing is impeccable in more ways than one. He pressed a button on his watch. It appears I have something to contribute to this evening's revelations as well. The penthouse's massive oak doors opened, and Mallory Chun, the Manhattan District Attorney, entered accompanied by 2 federal agents and Thaddeus's legal team, led by Ezra Rothstein, his longtime counsel. What is the meaning of this? Octavia demanded, half rising from her chair. Justice, Thaddeus replied simply. Or perhaps, more accurately, consequences. Ezra stepped forward, placing an elegantly wrapped package beside each person's dessert plate. When he reached Veronica, Octavia, and Winston, he placed slightly larger boxes before them. Before anyone departs, Thaddeus addressed the stunned room. I've prepared gifts that I believe will bring clarity to tonight's proceedings. Please, open them together. Guests exchanged bewildered glances before carefully unwrapping their packages. Inside each was an exquisite crystal chess piece, personalized with their names etched in gold. As many of you know, chess has always been my passion, Thaddeus explained, standing now. Each of you has played a role in my life, represented by the piece you hold. Those who have shown loyalty received knights and rooks. My advisors, bishops. Those who have demonstrated exceptional insight, queens. He turned to his family. Veronica, Mother Blackwood, Winston, your gifts are special editions. Please open them. With trembling fingers, Veronica unwrapped her package to reveal not a chess piece, but a small digital tablet. When she activated it, the screen displayed video of her and Dominic Barsotti in intimate situations, followed by recordings of them discussing explicit details of their scheme: the false foundation, the planned departure, the financial extractions. Octavia's package contained similar evidence of her role: meetings with offshore bankers, coaching Winston to reject his father, and detailed discussions about her percentage of Thaddeus's wealth once the takeover was complete. Winston's package was different. Inside was a leather-bound journal filled with entries in Thaddeus's handwriting. Each documented moments when Thaddeus had been present in his son's life, even when Winston hadn't realized it. Notes about his achievements, reflections on watching his son turn against him, and heartbreaking observations about deleted messages and manipulated perceptions. What is this? Veronica whispered, her face ashen. Chess is about seeing the entire board, Thaddeus replied, his voice calm, but carrying to every corner of the silent room. For 3 years, you, Dominic, and Octavia have been playing a game you thought I didn't know existed. You've moved your pieces methodically, isolating me, turning my children against me, preparing to take everything I've built. He walked to the center of the room. What you failed to realize is that I've been playing a different game entirely. While you focused on the obvious moves, I positioned my pieces for this exact moment. At another tap on his watch, the dining room's wall screens activated, showing multiple video feeds. FBI agents entering Nexus Technologies headquarters, international police raiding Geneva accounts, and Dominic Barsotti himself being escorted in handcuffs from his private jet at Teterboro Airport, where he'd been waiting to depart as soon as the final transfers were complete. 7 victims across 3 countries, Thaddeus continued, all following the same pattern. Successful executives targeted through their wives and families, their assets systematically drained, their children alienated. But you made a critical error when you selected me. Veronica's tablet now showed documentation of every fraudulent transfer she had initiated, every falsified investment, every forged signature. The $40 million you believe you've stolen? It never left my control. Every account, every shell company, every foundation has been monitored and documented by international financial crimes units for the past 2 years. The room remained absolutely silent. Some guests watched in shock. Others, those who held knights and queens in their hands, showed no surprise at all. Mother Blackwood, Thaddeus turned to Octavia, whose expression had shifted from shock to calculation. The $3 million you moved to Cayman accounts last week triggered freezes on all associated holdings. Your involvement has been documented extensively. Octavia stood suddenly. This is absurd. You can't possibly. Your voice on those recordings is rather distinctive, Thaddeus interrupted. The international banking violations alone carry a minimum 12-year sentence. At your age, that's essentially a life term. Veronica collapsed into her chair, the tablet slipping from her fingers. The children, she gasped. You can't. The children were never part of your deal with Dominic, Thaddeus said, his voice hardening for the first time. Did you really believe I wouldn't protect them? Eliza was too young for your manipulation, and Winston. He looked at his son, whose eyes remained fixed on the journal, tears streaming down his face. Winston deserves to know the truth about what his mother and grandmother have done. Mallory Chin stepped forward. Mrs. Mercer, Mrs. Blackwood, you are both named in federal indictments unsealed 30 minutes ago. Agents will escort you to processing. I suggest you cooperate fully. As the agents moved toward them, Octavia remained defiant, but Veronica seemed to have collapsed inward, offering no resistance as she was led away. Guests began excusing themselves hurriedly, leaving only those who had known about Thaddeus's counter-strategy, the knights, bishops, and queens of his real-life chess game. Winston remained seated, clutching the journal, his young face contorted with confusion and pain. "Dad," he asked, his voice small. "Did Mom really? Was it all?" Thaddeus knelt beside his son. "Not everything was a lie, Winston. She loves you in her way. But she made terrible choices, and now she has to face the consequences." "What happens to us?" Winston whispered. "We rebuild," Thaddeus said simply. "You, Eliza, and me. One day at a time." From the doorway, Eliza watched wide-eyed as federal agents escorted her mother and grandmother to waiting vehicles. Thaddeus crossed to her, lifting her into his arms. "Is Mommy in trouble?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart. Very serious trouble." "Are you sad?" Thaddeus considered the question carefully. "I'm sad about what we've lost, but not about what happens to people who betray those they're supposed to love." Later that night, after the penthouse had emptied and the children were asleep, Thaddeus sat in his study with Lysander, Irene, and Kamal. The chess set on his desk was arranged in the final position of a decisive victory. To the end of Dominic Barsati's operation, Lysander raised his glass. "And to the substantial bonuses you're all receiving," Thaddeus added, "along with my deepest gratitude." "What about the children?" Irene asked softly. "This won't be easy for them." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Thaddeus replied. "But they'll have the truth, therapy, and a father who never stopped fighting for them." Kamal examined the chessboard. "You sacrificed the queen to secure this victory. That's unusual for you." Thaddeus's expression hardened. "Some pieces aren't worth saving once they've been compromised." He reset the board, carefully positioning each piece in its starting position. "And some betrayals can never be forgiven, only avenged." After his team departed, Thaddeus stood at his window, watching the last federal vehicle pull away with Veronica inside. In his pocket was her wedding ring, which she'd thrown at him while being led away. He turned it over once between his fingers, then dropped it into a small wooden box where he kept other mementos of battles won and enemies defeated. Tomorrow would bring press coverage, legal proceedings, and the beginning of a new chapter with his children. For now, though, Thaddeus allowed himself a moment of cold satisfaction. The game was over. As he turned from the window, his phone chimed with a message from Winston. "Dad, when you have time, could we play chess tomorrow?" A different warmth spread through Thaddeus's chest as he typed his reply. "I'd like nothing more. Perhaps some things could be rebuilt after all." And there you have it, a tale of betrayal, calculation, and the lengths to which a person will go to protect what truly matters. Thaddeus Mercer's story reminds us that in life's chess game, victory often comes not to those who move the fastest, but to those who see the entire board and plan accordingly. Was his revenge justified? Was there a price to his victory that went beyond financial and legal consequences? These are questions worth considering as we reflect on our own relationships and the trust we place in others. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever experienced betrayal that forced you to reevaluate everything? How did you respond? Share your reflections in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that explore the complex tapestry of human relationships. Until next time, remember that in both chess and life, it's not just about winning. It's about how you play the game.